3 of my 5 children are ill. They cannot hear or speak. I believe this is a result of the testing. Their grandparents had no such illnesses at all.
I always wondered why I was born without arms. But my parents told me what they saw at the test site, and then I understood.
They may be testing underground now, but my family is buried as a result of that testing.
I vividly remember it was red, rolling red clouds, clouds of death. They well knew what they were doing to us, and this is what upsets me. If we had known, at least we could have taken precautions that would have saved a lot of the lives.
This is the story of the victims of nuclear testing, the hidden casualties of the Cold War. It's also the story of how the survivors galvanized an international movement to bring an end to nuclear testing for all time. The nuclear age dawned in the desert of New Mexico on July 16, 1945. The bomb was built to defend democracy during a war in which tyranny threatened to conquer the world. Those who witnessed Trinity, the first nuclear test, knew the world had changed forever. But no one imagined that for decades to come, nations would repeatedly expose their own citizens to the bomb's deadly effects. The atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were intended to speed an end to the war and to send a strong message to the Soviet Union. The United States conducted its first post-war nuclear tests in 1946 in the Marshall Islands, a United Nations trust territory. The trust agreement stated that the United States would protect the welfare, the rights, and fundamental freedoms of the native inhabitants.
American officials discussed plans with the Bikini natives for the evacuation of the atoll. The islanders are a nomadic group and are well pleased that the Yanks are going to add a little variety to their lives. Here, the natives will be safe from the atom bombing tests at Bikini, those tests which are so highly important to the world, the tests that will help chart the future for us all.
Operation Crossroads was the very first self-conscious test series which would again demonstrate U.S. dominance, unquestioned dominance after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that there was one superpower, and it was the United States. And there was a lot of publicity around Operation Crossroads, and it was a very, very public event which was designed to put the Soviet Union and everybody else on notice that the United States is going to determine the shape of what the world order will be like from now on.
Many of the islanders were evacuated before the blasts contaminated their homeland, but 42,000 U.S. sailors and soldiers were exposed to radiation.
They took some of the ships on which they were personnel into Bikini Lagoon after the test. They did not warn these soldiers properly that the lagoon was intensely radioactive. Some people actually swam in this lagoon. They also knew they had contaminated the whole Pacific Fleet. So they knew that some proportion of the 42,000 people that were there were likely to have been heavily irradiated. However, the military officers themselves, one document says that some of the naval leaders seemed to have a, quote, hairy-chested attitude toward the unseen hazard of radiation, and that this attitude was compromising the safety of the personnel.
From 1946 to 1958, the United States detonated 66 atomic and hydrogen bombs at Eniwetok and Bikini, vaporizing 6 islands. The Marshall Islanders were not warned about the dangers of fallout, and today they suffer from a variety of diseases caused by radiation. Their soil, fish, and coconuts are still radioactive. Jeton Onjine lived on Rongelap Atoll in the Marshall Islands before it was contaminated by fallout.
How come they come out there into the testing in the Marshall Islands? Why don't they do it in the United States? And they said they don't want to hurt their people.
America's display of nuclear might did not deter Stalin from his conquest of Eastern Europe. As the Cold War chilled, fear of the Soviet Union turned to hysteria for many Americans.
In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most drastic political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War.
During the height of the Cold War, we in the Soviet Union almost scared one another to death. Each of us apparently thought that the other was bent on the destruction of the other side. And as a consequence, we did a lot of silly things, a lot of unnecessary things, like poisoning the atmosphere. I mean, who today would ever think that sensible leaders would explode nuclear devices in the atmosphere, not having any real guarantee that anything other than total disaster would ensue? You can only explain it on the basis of fear, total fear, and fear eliminates rationality.
The fear reached a peak when Russia exploded its first atomic bomb.
The Soviet nuclear test in August of 1949, of course, served as a sort of a jarring wake-up to the United States and the Western world. It resulted immediately in the discussions as to whether the United States should undertake an all-out effort to develop the next stage of nuclear weapons, namely the hydrogen bomb.
Glenn Seaborg won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of plutonium, the deadly element used in the Nagasaki bomb and as the trigger in hydrogen bombs.
A highly trained and well-equipped North Korean army swarmed across the 38th parallel to attack unprepared South Korean defenders.
A year after the first Soviet test, the Korean War broke out when North Korea invaded the South. China entered the war on the side of North Korea.
Would the atom bomb be the answer to the Chinese hordes? President Truman said that it was under consideration.
If the United Nations yields to the forces of aggression, no nation will be safe or secure.
During the Korean War, the U.S. government established a nuclear test site in the United States. The chosen site was high desert land, which by treaty belonged to the Western Shoshone Nation. The Atomic Energy Commission determined that the area was virtually uninhabited. Soldiers were among the first participants at the new Nevada test site.
And the military was actively looking at the nuclear option in North Korea and also in China. However, the military did not know the effect of the atomic bomb on hardened bunker position, that is, troops in foxholes. As a consequence, one of the reasons for marching United States troops right up to the nuclear fireball was to essentially simulate the use of nuclear weapons in Korea and also in Vietnam.
Gentlemen, I want to welcome you to Camp Desert Rock. This will be your last briefing before you go out to the forward area and take part in an atomic detonation.
Basically,